Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak this morning or this afternoon on Bill C-45, an act representing cannabis, respecting cannabis, and amending the Controlled Drugs and Substance Act and the Criminal Code and other acts. Bill C-45 was first introduced here in this place on April the 13th, 2017. Just over a year ago. It's remarkable to me that the Liberal government, just a little over a year, is desperately trying to force this proposal through. Although there has been a great deal of work done around this bill, it is abundantly clear that this has happened far too quickly. The Liberals are rushing through this legislation to meet their political deadline. Not a well thought through plan, but a deadline that they have self-imposed on themselves. This is despite very serious concerns that were raised from scientists, doctors, and law enforcement officials. I want to note from the outset that I do not support the legalization of marijuana. The Conservative Party has adopted a much more measured, responsible approach to keep minor marijuana possession illegal, but to make it a ticketable offence. This is a position that has long been adopted by the Canadian Association of Chief Police. Unfortunately, Liberal backbenchers appear willing to support the Prime Minister's dangerous proposal, so I believe we have a moral responsibility to soberly consider the consequences of legalizing marijuana in so many areas of Canadian life. The fact that the Liberals are continuing down this reckless road without having a fully fleshed out legal framework in place for the significant supplementary conditions is irresponsible. The only appropriate way to move forward with a bill of this scope, if that is truly what the Liberals wish to do, is to move cautiously and carefully. Anything less represents a profound failure to ensure that these changes do not increase risks to Canadian children and families. It is the primary duty of any government to keep its citizens safe. The specific goals of Bill C-45 are outlined in Section 7, and they include protecting youth, regulating the industry, eliminating the black market. The problem is that Bill C-45 will accomplish none of these goals. I'll focus for the most part on my concerns around protecting our youth. Mr. Marco Vasquez, a former police chief in the town of Erie, Colorado, has this to say to the Standing Committee on Health. When you increase availability, decrease perception of risk, and increase the public acceptance of any commodity, you will see increased use. Once we see that increased use, it's very difficult to keep marijuana out of the hands of our youth. We know from validated studies that marijuana use for youth under 30 years of age, especially chronic use, can have adverse effects on brain development. We also know that 1 in 6 youth become addicted to marijuana. We've certainly seen an increased use of marijuana in Colorado, and I believe that the increased use will ultimately increase disorder and risk factors for our youth. We're already seeing signs of increased disorder within our own communities. Dr. Laurent Marcoux, president of the Canadian Medical Association, also noted, children and youth are especially at risk of harm given their brain's development, and they are among the highest users of cannabis in Canada. To better protect this part of the population, we are recommending that the age of legalization be set at 21 years. The quantities and the potency of cannabis should also be more restricted to those under the age of 25. Despite these increased risks, however, evidence shows that youth today do not believe cannabis has serious health effects. A comprehensive public health strategy for cannabis must therefore include education, similar to what has been done with tobacco. Educational strategies should be implemented before and no later than the enactment of any legislation in order to increase awareness of the harms and to conduct further research or impact. These are just a couple of the comments on the matter of youth consumption of cannabis. Currently, Bill C-45 recommends the age 18 as a federal minimum, but medical professionals have testified that the brain continues to develop until the age of 25. Increased use before the age of 25 increases one's risk of developing mental disorders like schizophrenia, depression, and anxiety by up to 30% compared to those who have not used marijuana under the age of 25. This is why the CMA and the other medical professionals recommended raising the age at which a person can consume marijuana to at least age 21. Another challenge with this bill is that children ages 12 to 17 are able to possess up to 5 grams of marijuana. As the points I have just raised will underscore, this is ridiculous in the light of the medical evidence of the harm that it can cause to youth. Bill C-45 offers no provision to prevent them from selling or distributing cannabis to other 12 and 17-year-olds. I turn now to the homegrown provisions included in this bill. Bill C-45 allows 4 plants per dwelling with no height restriction on the plants. If grown in optimal conditions, this could yield as much as 600 grams of marijuana. What we heard from plenty of testimony at the Health Committee is that there is a great deal of apprehension around homegrown. These concerns were raised by most medical groups and the police forces that appeared. For one thing, this proposal absolutely does not keep marijuana out of the hands of youth. If it is in the home, youth will have access to it. Furthermore, there is no requirement to lock up the marijuana if the home has people under the age of 18 living in it or even just frequenting it. What we've seen in other jurisdictions is that by legalizing homegrown marijuana, that area has been hugely penetrated by organized crime. This is why the state of Washington, for example, does not allow home grow except for medically fragile persons who cannot get to a dispensary. They have been able to reduce organized crime to less than 20% of the market. Dr. Kevin Sabet, president of Smart Approaches to Marijuana, told the Health Committee, "We are deluding ourselves if we think that major drug trafficking organizations will not exploit every chance that they get to have a way to be legitimized through the legal market. We're seeing this in other states too. We're also deluding ourselves to think that they will go away and not try to undercut the government price of cannabis. The economies rule the day here in terms of price. The lower the drug price, the more likely someone is to use, and the illegal market can easily undercut the legal market." I want to speak for a moment about my province of Manitoba here as well. The government of Manitoba made a responsible decision to prohibit home grow in the province. This decision will cut out more of the black market and better protect children. Unfortunately, the Liberals appear poised to reject an amendment that would confirm the ability of provinces to make these sorts of localized decisions within their own territories. Quebec and Nunavut have also expressed a desire to make similar steps in their respective legislatures. The Liberal government has thrown a lot at the provinces and territories with Bill C-45, and to reject an amendment that would help provinces better manage this transition to legal marijuana would indicate a significant lack of judgment. Madam Speaker, I hope the Liberals will make the right choice, help provinces make the best decisions for their residents. Madam Speaker, my wife is a very good cook and baker, and when she bakes a batch of cookies or cakes, brownies, and not cannabis brownies, real brownies made with cocoa, she doesn't put them on the counter thinking that this isn't available to children. With the legislation that we have before us, we're going to see home-grow marijuana readily available to youth in the kitchens, in the living rooms, in the family rooms, in their dens, easily accessible by youth. The ill-conceived and poorly thought-out plan of legalizing home-grow operations makes one of their priorities, which is protecting youth, completely unattainable, Madam Speaker, because it's going to be so easily accessible. When I get a prescription for after a surgery for pain relief or medication, I don't take that prescription and leave it lying on the counter somewhere where it's easily accessible to children in the sunlight so that it can grow. No, I put that prescription in a cabinet inaccessible to children where they can't get it. We tell children not to play with matches, Madam Speaker. We don't keep matches within the reaches of children, and yet we're going to have homegrown marijuana within the reach of our youth and children, and we're going to absolutely be inviting them to play with this dangerous chemical. Madam Speaker, I think it's irresponsible for this government to think that they're reaching this objective of protecting our youth by allowing home grow operations to be legitimate and by forcing provinces to agree. They talk about provinces having the ability to set their own regulations, and indeed some of them have, and I compliment my Manitoba government for establishing stricter regulations as far as the age by which possession and use will be accepted. But not allowing them to establish restrictions on home grow is just irresponsible.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I thank the member opposite for his remarks and his hard work on committee, which we always appreciate his contributions. Madam Speaker, I was actually going to begin by sharing with him the provisions in Manitoba's Bill 11 regarding the prohibitions with cannabis, which actually makes it a defence for the possession, consumption, purchase of cannabis for persons under the age of majority in that province. But he's obviously clearly aware of it, notwithstanding he expressed concern that that was somehow going to be made legal. I just wanted to point out to the member opposite that we have acknowledged the provincial and territorial jurisdiction to place restrictions on personal cultivation, restrictions on its location, to impose such things as restrictions on requirements for fencing, security, safety, sanitation, smell abatement, fencing requirements, not having it in proximity to schools or other public places frequented by children. We have acknowledged the authority of provincial jurisdiction to place whatever restrictions they believe appropriate in order to regulate this substance and the personal cultivation of this substance only for personal use in a safe and responsible way. But, Madam Speaker, we also have acknowledged that prohibition takes away the opportunity to regulate it. And so we have not said to the province of Manitoba that it cannot regulate it in this way, but we're not changing our legislation to allow for prohibition when the evidence is overwhelming that prohibition is failing us.
The Honourable Member for Provencher.
Thank you to the Parliamentary Secretary for that comment. I don't think that there was really a question there. But as far as the age of majority, I think he's slightly off there. I think Manitoba has opted to go with 19 as their age, not 18. And I think that's a responsible decision. I disagree with him very strongly that children won't have easier access to marijuana under their proposed regulation or bill. I think that they should recognize the concerns that the provinces have already established with the homegrown aspect of their legislation and say, hey, you know what, the provinces are also identifying some serious concerns with this. The Senate has identified that. Why don't we go along? Obviously, there's some experts outside of this House. I know it's hard to believe. We think we're all experts here. But there are experts outside of this place that also have very valid opinions, and I think it would be very wise to acknowledge some of those other opinions and to give them some of the things that they need.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Edmonton West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll thank my colleague for his comments. One of the issues we raised earlier has been the amount of officers across the country that need training in impairment. Our police chief in Edmonton has stated it's very expensive, it's a huge burden on municipalities. The Public Service Minister has stated that they are going to provide funding for this. So, quote, there's a long way to go before summer work on all fronts to get this adopted. We're working on accreditation testing machines, etc., and we're going to be funding it. But in the main estimates, which is the spending authority from the government, there's not one single penny listed under public safety for funding to help municipalities or the RCMP. In the Vote 40, the slush fund that the Liberals have set up, which is supposedly to get money out the door faster, there's not one penny under public safety to help out municipalities. In their departmental plan, which is supposed to be sending out the priorities for the year, it does not mention a single result or a goal for assisting municipalities in training of the officers. So I'd like to ask my colleague, does this sound like the government, as the Minister of Public Safety says, is stepping up to help municipalities? And if so, where's all the money hidden?
The Honourable Member for Provencher just has just a little over a minute to respond.
No, a little less. But thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank my colleague from Edmonton West for his very excellent question. Where's the money going to come from to train all the law enforcement officials with dealing with this new epidemic that we're creating, and that's the excessive use of marijuana? And there is no money. We've heard at committee that it's going to cost an average $20,000 per member, per law enforcement individual to be trained to use and detect impairment by cannabis. And there's been no money set aside for the RCMP, for other law enforcement agencies where they can train their officers to properly detect and then also determine. And the other thing, there hasn't been legislation yet adopted, nor will soon be adopted, that will establish limits for impairment and also medically approved devices. that need to be purchased by all these police forces, also another cost that I don't think that this government has at all anticipated nor provided for. And I think it's just reckless on their part to push their political agenda in trying to get this bill approved quickly. I think it needs more time. We need to make sure that the regulations are in place to regulate it.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I rise today to speak on the amendment bill C-45 respecting the legalization of cannabis. I will be sharing my time with the member from Markham Unionville. Well, there's no question, Madam Speaker, that this Liberal government is intent on pushing this bill through despite numerous concerns voiced by experts, by law enforcement, by Canadians across this country, including school boards from coast to coast to coast. This is not a bill which should be forced through Parliament on a whim, as Parliament has spent many months studying the implication of this bill. Many concerns and problems with the bill have been brought forward, as we've heard continuously in the last hour or so in the House. It is critically important for all Canadians that this Liberal government work to resolve these problems, and that it listen to these concerns rather than try to push this bill through at all costs. The Senate, as we know, Madam Speaker, has returned C-45 to the House with 45 amendments, but this Liberal government has agreed on only 29 of them. It has no plans to resolve any of the problems which is still left to be unaddressed, and given its rejection of other crucial amendments. However, notably, the Liberals are refusing to allow provinces to determine on their own whether to ban cultivation of marijuana in individual homes. This is a big issue, Madam Speaker. Provinces such as Manitoba and Quebec have already signaled their deep concern with the negative social impacts which occur as a result of allowing households to grow up to 4 marijuana plants. These provinces have concerns, and they want to be able to have the power to ban homegrown marijuana cultivation, but this Liberal government has blatantly ignored these concerns and has said absolutely not. Most of the medical groups and the police services which have appeared before the House of Committees studying this bill have said that they are against the provision in C-45 to allow homegrown marijuana. Even if these households contain small children, even if this provision allows organized crime to exploit homegrown marijuana production, and even if the police have said that they will be in serious difficulty in monitoring that people are growing no more than 4 plants in their homes. This Liberal government has said no to those provisions. The Liberals have shown that they care more about pushing through this bill as soon as possible than they care about public safety or about fixing the significant flaws in this bill. This action is totally unacceptable, Madam Speaker, and it also demonstrates clearly that the Liberals have their priorities backward. I spoke to many real estate people in my province of Saskatchewan, and actually on lobby day, many of them came through our offices here representing the Canadian real estate boards. They are also concerned. There are no landlord-tenant regulations to grow 4 plants in a home that maybe somebody is renting. This is something that needs to be discussed with the Canadian Real Estate Board, and it is yet to do so. You know, Madam Speaker, in March of this year, I spent 8 days touring various communities in Nunavut, and I've visited many schools, 8 or 9 on our trip, and that was really enjoyable. While I was meeting with the people of these communities, I heard many serious concerns with this bill and how it would negatively impact the well-being of these northern communities. We should say right off the bat, there are no health centers in Nunavut for people struggling with addictions. I heard time and time again there is not one facility in Nunavut that will handle addictions. So when you have a problem, you'll either be flown to Winnipeg or all the way to Montreal. These people want to stay in their communities, and yet they have no addiction facilities. Perhaps we should start there, Madam Speaker. Start with at least one addiction facility in Nunavut and work out from there. But no, this bill will pass, and we'll see the horrific incidents that will happen time and time again in Nunavut because of this. Well, they're taking no steps to mitigate the negative consequences that this bill will have in these communities. I found that firsthand when I toured each village up in Nunavut. Many of the elders are really concerned with this cannabis bill, and they have not been consulted. Yet this government claims they consult Indigenous peoples, and yet the Inuit communities up there that I saw, 7 or 8 of them, have not been consulted as of March on this bill. Yet they want to make sure at all costs that provincial and territorial governments will not be able to ban the homegrown marijuana plants within their own jurisdictions. This is not at all helpful, Madam Speaker, and it does nothing to address the many concerns which I heard during my visit to these communities in late February and March. These people are being ignored by this Liberal government because the Liberals' priority is to push this bill through at any cost. The role of Parliament, of course, is to ensure that bills are passed which are for the betterment of all Canadians and do not cause harm to people across the country. And actually, the way in which Bill C-45 is being handled by this current government suggests in no way, shape or form that the best interests of Canadians are being attended to. We have talked to many people in this country about this bill, Madam Speaker. Number one is the education aspect of this bill. You would think this government, they've started in December, started advertising about the cannabis, but where would you start? Well, Madam Speaker, I would think you should contact the Canadian school boards for a start. Don't you think you should be in every classroom in this country talking about cannabis? The good and the bad about cannabis in this country? They haven't done anything at the school board level in this country. I know because I have a daughter in the city of Saskatoon that is a teacher. She is teaching grades 7 and 8. They haven't even discussed this bill, and it's coming forth right away. I also have a son in Alberta teaching in Lethbridge, and he's teaching in junior college. They haven't even talked about this. These are kids that are in grade 9, 10, and 11. Yet these schools have not talked about this bill and how it will be worked out in the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan. And we were told when the minister brought this bill forward that there would be a vast education program with it. We've seen 1 or 2 ads on television, Madam Speaker, but get to the grassroots. Get to the kids that are in grade 6, 7, 8, and beyond. Why wouldn't you talk about this bill in schools? Why wouldn't you give them some literature in each school in this country to talk about the harmful effects of cannabis? They've done none of it, Madam Speaker. I was a school board trustee for 9.5 years. I asked this question time and time again to this government about the education of this bill. Oh yeah, we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're going to spend on education. They have done next to nothing, Madam Speaker. Schools are petrified that come September, they are the ones that are going to have to deal with this. When they get a 7-year-old coming to their school with cannabis in their pocket, and yet none of this has been done. What do you mean, come on? In our schools in Saskatoon, that has happened already. That's how much they know about this, Madam Speaker. They have no idea what goes on in our communities, how we're trying to give our students in elementary and secondary better lives. Instead, they're just pushing this Bill C-45 ahead without any consultation on the people that I think it affects most of all, and that is our young people. Shame on this government, Madam Speaker. They have not done the consultation they said they were going to do. They have not reached out to the Canadian School Boards Association. And I know because I've talked to the Saskatchewan school boards. They have done nothing. A shame of them to push this bill today, C-45, without talking to the people that affects the most. And that is our kids, our future, Madam Speaker. I cannot support this bill without any consultation that this government said months ago it was starting. They have done nothing, and they should be ashamed of themselves, Madam Speaker, and there's no way on this side we are going to support C-45.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Small Business and Tourism.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for his speech. One thing that you mentioned in your speech is that you don't feel that this...
Secretary, that she's to address the questions and comments to the Chair.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Of course. Madam Chair, one thing that the member opposite mentioned in his speech was that he didn't feel that outreach had been done and that we're not talking to students about cannabis. I've heard this before, and I actually have a daughter that's 15 years old and in high school now, and I said to her, listen, I've heard from some colleagues that they aren't hearing about this educational piece that we're doing on cannabis. Have you heard anything about it? And she said to me that, yes, it's in my news feed all the time in all the social media forums. So I'd just like to make the comment that, you know, we're not the audience that this education is directed at, so it's quite possible that my colleagues aren't seeing the impact of this education, you know, right in their own news feeds, but it is happening. And I'd like to ask my colleague across the way, how does he think we could best educate students about the concerns that we have with cannabis, about proper use, and about the legislation that's coming through?
The member for Saskatoon Grasswood.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Yes, not everybody follows Facebook. Not everyone follows Twitter. So what do you think this government should have done back in December as they were proposing this bill to come forward this year? Don't you think they should have reached out to the Canadian School Boards Association? Don't you think they should have reached out to all school divisions in this country with some literature, with some pamphlets, some education on it, maybe even a video or two? That would seem to be the wise thing to do, Madam Speaker. We've just heard from the honourable member. They've done none of this. They're relying on Facebook and Twitter. Isn't that disgusting that they never once have gone into the schools in this country and tell them the effects of this cannabis bill C-45?
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I think it would be highly irresponsible for anyone to actually believe that today there is not cannabis in our classrooms. And that is the reality of the situation. Nowhere in North America or in the U.S., Canada, and the Western world where we have a higher usage of young people engaged in cannabis in one way or another. Today we have gangs that are selling cannabis to those 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. By legalizing it and regulating it, Madam Speaker, what we are doing is we are going to be helping young people and taking hundreds of millions of dollars away from criminal elements in our society, and we're able to use that money better, whether it's healthcare or whatever else it might be. My question to my friend across the way, would he not at the very least acknowledge what the rest of Canadian society already knows? And that is that there is already a general awareness and usage of cannabis amongst young people higher virtually than any other country in the Western world.
The honourable member for Saskatoon Grasswood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, I would acknowledge there is marijuana in each school in this country. There is no question about that. But, you know, does that make it right? Of course it doesn't make it right. What are we going to do to talk about the health of the cannabis bill that's coming forward? I question. I still think we'll have an underground economy in marijuana in our country. I don't think this bill talks about that at all. So we've got some issues here with this bill. It's fast-tracked. We all know that, Madam Speaker. And I just don't think they've done their due diligence. One of the questions I would like to even ask the honourable member is on reserves in this country that control their own police force. They haven't been consulted at all. These are police forces within Indigenous communities. They haven't got the money to do training on cannabis, and yet they're going through with this. And yet First Nations on reserves have loudly said they want in on this also. I mean, they want training, and yet there's nothing from the public service minister. There is nothing that will give police on reserves that are run by Indigenous people the right to do this.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Markham Unionville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today to once again speak on the on an issue that I and many Canadians are deeply concerned about it, and that is to speak against the Bill C-45. This bill will legalize marijuana in Canada. This bill will legalize a dangerous drug that is nothing less than damaging and addicting. I have been very clear that I am against this piece of legislation. I have taken the time to listen to the experts from all backgrounds, and the findings continue to be the same. Marijuana is dangerous, and Canada needs to think twice before going through with this bill. The Liberals really don't seem to get it. Let me remind us all the facts. According to the Canadian Medical Association, increased use of marijuana before the age of 25 severely impact brain development. This means that this drug should not be made available to young people. In case of Colorado, where marijuana is legal, there have been cases of elementary school students consuming brownies with marijuana in them and showing up high to school as a result of how accessible the drug is in their homes. We are now beginning to see that happens in Canada. People have the misconception that marijuana is already legal. It unfortunately gets worse. We saw in Oshawa 2 instances of marijuana snacks being brought into school in the form of gummy bears and cookies last month in 2 different occasions. The government refuses to think of our children here. This is wrong. Unfortunately, the Liberals continue to put their political agenda over the safety of Canadians and failing to consider the consequences. Worst of all, our police force is underfunded, unequipped, and not properly trained to react to influx of drugs into our communities. Just last week, we saw the Colorado governor say he won't rule out banning marijuana once again. When it comes to health and safety, Canadians deserve the best. Looking at the instance of Colorado again, they are already regretting the decision of legalizing marijuana. The governor even said last month he won't rule out making marijuana illegal again. We shouldn't make the same mistakes as Colorado. Many Canadians are deeply worried. My constituents in Markham Unionville have told me countless times how concerned they are about the consequences of allowing marijuana to flow freely into our communities. I will remain on the right side of this issue. The legalization of marijuana is a serious matter. I don't understand why the government refuses to look at all the facts. They just have the arbitrary deadline in mind and are continuing to full steam ahead. The Liberal government's plan to legalize marijuana will make Canada the first developed country in the world to do so. The fact alone should make us pause. Why are we signing up to the largest social experiment of the 21st century when all the experts are telling us to slow down? I would have hoped that instead of politicizing the issue, the Prime Minister would take into the consideration of many concerns presented by the health experts, first responders, community leaders, and residents. Instead, the Prime Minister has opted to using everything at his disposal to rush Bill C-45 into law. The evidence is clear. Marijuana contains over 400 chemicals. Many of these are the same harmful chemicals found in tobacco smoke and cause serious harm to youth brain development. There are no doubt about it, marijuana is not safe. Misguided idea pushed by the Liberals that recreational use of this drug is harmless and it should be legalized reinforces a misconception that marijuana is harmless. It will result in the normalization of marijuana usage for which our young people will pay dearly. Countless medical professionals have testified that the brain continues to develop until the age of 25. According to the Canadian Medical Association, increased use of marijuana before the age of 25 increases one's risk of developing mental disorder such as schizophrenia, depression, and anxiety by up to 30% compared to those who have not used marijuana under the age of 25. The government cannot go through with this bill. I have heard loud and clear from my riding they are concerned about the negative consequences legalizing marijuana will have on our communities and youth. They are worried about what it will do to the value of their homes. What the Liberals just keep going, this is a piece of legislation that pertains to an issue very close to me. Marijuana is a dangerous drug. With all the pro-marijuana publicity lately, it can be heard for many Canadians to remember that marijuana is indeed damaging and addictive. Madam Speaker, Canadian families expect safe and healthy communities in which to raise their children. Elected representatives can and should provide guidance on this drug to reflect the view of all Canadians. Let us all remember we are talking about the health and safety of Canadians, and they deserve better. Let us not rush through this legislation. We need to do what is right for all Canadians. The provinces, municipalities, and police forces are not ready to implement this legislation. I have said this many times before. I oppose this legislation entirely. I choose to listen to the concerns raised by the scientists, doctors, and law enforcement officials. I want to advocate for the voices that are not heard in this legislation, those who say this government plan is being rushed through without proper planning or consideration for the negative consequences of such complicated legislation. The passing of C-45 would lead to negative repercussions at the global level. The government claims this legislation will control the drug, but in reality, it will allow the drug to become out of control, especially when we look at the issue of homegrown. I really can't believe it. If marijuana is in the homes, youth will have access to it. We have already seen this happen. Why won't the government look at this bill so what it really is? A big mistake. We cannot normalize this drug. We should not legalize it. Our children will pay the price. Madam Speaker, I was speaking to the police chief of York Region. He is deadly against this thing. He asked me a question, our member of parliament from Southwest, what side he was on for the 40 years when he was in the law enforcement compared to what side he is on. There is no money to York Region alone. It will cost $54 million over the 3 years. The previous Liberal provincial government had promised up to 60%, and 40% will be taken by the local residents of York Region. Is that fair? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to respond to the question put directly to me by my friend from Markham, Richmond Hill. Madam Speaker, I was on the side of protecting our kids. I was on the side of public safety, and I was on the side of fighting organized crime for 40 years. I still am. Madam Speaker, just to correct a couple of things, and perhaps the member opposite is simply not aware. He said that the police are underfunded, or not funded in this. That's simply patently false and incorrect. And I'm sure the member would be very reassured by the knowledge that our government has committed $274 million to fund the police, and by the way, that for the first time, so that they are trained, they receive training, they receive access to technology. We also, in recognition of municipal police services, and he made reference to the York Regional Police Service, we made $81 million available for the training and equipping of municipal police services, and that will be done through the province. And so perhaps he could direct his concerns to the new provincial government in Ontario. And finally, Madam Speaker, we also gave up 1/2 of the federal excise tax in a 75-25 split so that the provinces would have more money to supply municipalities to address their costs. And so the member's remarks, quite frankly, perhaps are not adequately informed about the facts of the funding that is available to law enforcement. And I take it as well, Madam Speaker.
No, unfortunately, I do have to allow for other questions. The honourable member for Markham Unionville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What I understand is that, for the total share for this $80 million, $90 million, just only $300,000 over 3 years. If you divide it, 80% money goes to the federal forces, RCMP training, and the other agencies. Only 20%, what I'm told, is go towards it. The total share is $300,000 over 3 years. But the cost to implement this federal bill is $54 million. And there is a $21.6 million shortfall, which will be taken by the local residents of York Region, which in many cases the taxes are up to 54% there in the tax bracket. Many other issues. How to enforce the homegrown stuff. The police police hardly can do their work, but they're hired for. At this moment, what the police supposed to go door in every single door? Are we here to check your plants? And also, what I learned from the police chief, only 40% of the convictions are done because the judges are throwing all the stuff out. When the resident is saying these 4 or 6 or 10 plants are ready, the next plants are they're available in 1 week, and there are the seeds, the plants. There are 10 different crops coming up in their homes. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for West Nova.
Close. Central Nova, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much. Hard to tell us apart, both Frasers too. Madam Speaker, look, I've got a question for the honourable member opposite. I'd like to thank him for his remarks and thoughtful deliberation on this file, but I patently disagree with him on a number of issues that he raised. He suggested that this bill is going to lead to the situation becoming out of control, that it's going to hurt our youth. Those things are happening today. Right now, they're not just happening in Canada today, they are happening as much or more in Canada as they are anywhere in the world that actually keeps track of the statistics of the rate of use by young people when it comes to cannabis consumption. My question for the honourable member opposite is, why is he so committed to the status quo when it has failed our youth, when it has diverted profits to criminal organizations? Why would we defend a system that has proven to be a failure?
The honourable member for Markham Unionville has just a little under a minute to respond.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Why legalize it? Why not decriminalize it? I agree with this guy. There is a big issue. Now you're going to make it worse. He's going to make it worse. Why it's available on every single corner. There is only 150 stores they're proposing in the nationwide for the first, second, or third year. This bill, people are assuming, people already thinking this thing is already legalized. Doing this will make the situation worse. It's going to be more crimes committed, and police does not have the equipment. They have no machines. They have no training. They have no money. How they're going to enforce this issue? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
And I do want to apologize to the member for Central Nova for saying that he was from West Nova. I do apologize. Resuming debate, reprise de débat. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And maybe a good way to start off is to comment on a potential question that was across the floor. And it went something like this: why legalize instead of just decriminalizing? And, you know, maybe the best way to answer that is my understanding of the whole issue of decriminalization of cannabis. There's actually 2 entities that I'm aware of that actually support that. One would be the Conservative Party of Canada, and the other would be the many different criminal elements that are in society, Madam Speaker. Because it is the criminal elements of society that would benefit the most if all you did was to decriminalize cannabis, Madam Speaker. Think about it. So as opposed to having a criminal charge, you would be subjected to a fine, Madam Speaker. And that's what it is that the Conservative Party ultimately would like to see happen. I would suggest to you that it would be, I know in the north end of Winnipeg, the gangs would love to have a policy of that nature where it's decriminalized. You see, Madam Speaker, what we're talking about through legalization is we're saying that at the end of the day, that we want to have a real, tangible impact on two things in particular that are the highest priorities for me. One is the usage of cannabis with young people in our society today, and this legislation will go much further than anything that we have ever seen out in this House in the last 20-plus years, Madam Speaker, in terms of taking a more responsible, and I would suggest to you, we will actually have fewer young people engaged in cannabis as a direct result of this legislation. And I'll give a specific example how that's possible. The other thing, Madam Speaker, that we are going to see is a lot of disappointed individuals that use cannabis as an illegal way to acquire great sums of money. We're talking criminal activities that generate hundreds of millions of dollars every year at the expense of selling a lot of cannabis to youth in every region of our country. Put yourself in a position of a young 14, 15-year-old attending a school anywhere in our country that is told, if you take this bag of cannabis or a bag of marijuana and you go sell it to your friends or maybe a sibling, Madam Speaker, you could make money by doing this. And we get a lot of peer pressure from young people, and the motivation often is to go out and generate money for their pockets, and it ultimately goes back to that the gang activities that we often see in our communities, Madam Speaker. So that is what's actually happening today. In our high schools, in our elementary schools, we have individuals through criminal activities that are being motivated to get young people more engaged. And we have more young people engaged in cannabis than any other country in the Western world, Madam Speaker, in terms of a per capita percentage. There is so much that we could be doing to have a real positive impact. I am very much pleased and happy with the amount of consultation that has taken place. One member of the Conservative Party says, well, very few people know about it. I'm concerned about the school boards and so forth. Well, Madam Speaker, I would suggest to you that there's very little issues that has generated the type of attention that this issue has. In fact, it was a major platform issue for the Liberal Party of Canada going in the last federal election, Madam Speaker. It's been all over many different media outlets. People make reference to social media. It's been throughout householders throughout the country. I would find it very difficult to believe that there is any elected official in Canada that's not aware of it, let alone members of the general public, Madam Speaker. People are very much in tune and aware of what's taking place and the anticipation that it will, in fact, become legalized. So I don't share the concerns that the Conservatives have in terms of, well, people are not aware enough, or there's just not enough attention being given to the issue. Madam Speaker, whether it's our bureaucrats, in particular of the Department of Health or Public Service, or Public Safety, I should say, or the ministers in particular, I must point out, Madam Speaker, in my many years of being a parliamentarian, never before have I seen an individual kind of lead the legislation, lead the process, be as open and as transparent as our parliamentary secretary for health, Madam Speaker. The parliamentary secretary responsible has done an outstanding job, Madam Speaker, and I just wanted to be able to commend the outreach and the information flow that has been stemming from here, from the Senate, and from all those other stakeholders to ensure that this is in fact being done in the right way. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Hear, hear. Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? Resuming debate, reprise de débat. Is the House ready for the question? The question is as follows. Ms. Wilson-Raybould, seconded by Ms. Hadju, move that a message be sent to the Senate to acquaint their honours that in relation to Bill C-45, an act respecting cannabis, and to amend the controlled dispense. Plaît-il à la Chambre d'adopter?
The pleasure of the House to adopt the motion.
Que tous ceux qui appuient la...
All those in favor of the motion will please say yay.
Que tous ceux...
All those opposed? On division?
Que tous ceux qui s'y opposent...
All those opposed will please say nay.
À mon avis, les oui là.
In my opinion, the yeas have it.
Conformément à l'ordre adopté...
Pursuant to an order adopted on May 29th, 2018, the recorded division stands deferred until later today, at the time after the time provided for oral questions.